So when we talk about the importance, we have mere minutes, right? In order, when we recognize that there's an issue or a situation happening, we have mere minutes to jump to the chair side and start taking action. So basically, CPR equals now, right? We've got to jump on it. So for every second counts during the crisis, and a rapid response is critical to the patient's survival. Often called a code or a code blue, this type of medical emergency honestly should be occasional in the dialysis setting, right? At least in the chronic units. It's really not something that we want to see on a weekly basis for sure. If we're lucky, maybe this happens once a year. However, it is important that we are prepared and ready. Fun fact, when I was looking up research on this and looking at where code and code blue came from, it actually originated just back in the 90s through the Bethany Medical Center in Kansas City. And actually this same group of people that started this code blue, were actually responsible for one of the original crash carts as well. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about where CPR got its start. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to narrate these next few slides. So some of the earliest documented cases in resuscitation date back as early as the 18th century. First documented case of using mouth-to-mouth to revive a suffocated coal pit miner in Scotland was in 1732. In 1740, the Paris Academy of Sciences officially recommends that mouth-to-mouth reviving victims of drowning. We move into the 1800s. Early forms of chest compression start to make its debut. In 1891, after using external compressions to restart the hearts of two young human patients, German surgeon Dr. Friedrich Maas becomes the first to advocate chest compressions rather than ventilation alone to help with circulation. But the technique doesn't really take hold for the next half century. So at the time, open heart massage is the standard. So they were still cracking open chests, right? Which is all well and good. If they're cracking open the chest and they're manually massaging the heart, that's great if you survive, but you're likely going to die later from infection. Because infection control was not so great back then. All right, we move into the 1900s. American surgeon Dr. George Krill reports successful closed chest cardiac massage on one human case, but once again, the non-invasive technique is just really not taking traction yet. We move into the 20s. We have 6 cardiologists that decided to meet in Chicago, and guess what? That was the birth of the American Heart Association. 1947, in Cleveland, Ohio, we had a cardiothoracic surgeon, Dr. Claude Beck, performs the first successful use of an electric defibrillator on an exposed human heart. Let's move into the 50s. AHA begins publishing scientific journals informing physicians and researchers on cardiovascular breakthroughs. In 1957, Johns Hopkins team unveils the first portable defibrillator, which was, may I say, about 200 pounds and on a wheeled cart. So I use the term portable very, very lightly. All right, we move into the 60s. We've got resuscitation pioneers, which was Drs. Cohenhaven, Safar, and Dr. Jude. They decided that combining mouth-to-mouth along with closed chest compressions is going to be a better route, and hence kind of creating the cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or the life-saving actions we now know as CPR. The AHA starts a program to acquaint physicians with closed chest cardiac resuscitation, which then becomes the forerunner of what we know as CPR training today. Also, Resusci Annie was born, and we're going to talk about her here in the next slide. 1966, the National Research Council of the National Academy of Sciences convenes to establish a standardized training and performance standards of CPR, which isn't that long ago. So we just finally started getting standards going in the 60s. So let's talk about Resusci Annie. Who knew she was going to be a baby boomer? I didn't know that. So it actually came from the name of an unknown girl who had drowned in the River Seine in Paris, France. Because her identity could not be established, they actually did a death mask of her, as was the standard or customary back in those days. So they did this mask of her. Well, fast forward to the 50s, you've got Asmund S. Lardell, who actually we know as the Lardell Medical Company, who does simulation programs and has later on does CPR devices. Anyway, he started out as a doll and a toy maker by trade. So he wanted to work on a lifelike mannequin to help people training in CPR. So the mannequin face is the likeness of the girl that was found from the River Seine. All right, moving into the 70s and 80s. 72 was the first mass citizen training program. So over 100,000 people were trained in CPR in just over a 2-year duration. That's a lot. 1981, a program to provide telephone instructions for performing CPR begins in King County, Washington. The program trains emergency dispatchers to give callers CPR instructions while EMT are en route. 1983, the AHA convenes a national conference on pediatric resuscitation to develop CPR and ECC guidelines for pediatrics and neonatal patients. So they didn't even start thinking about neonatals and peds until the 80s. All right, let's look at the 90s and today. So 1990, we had public access defibrillation programs provide training and resources, including AEDs, to the public so that they can help resuscitate victims of cardiac arrest. We look in the early 2000s, the AHA revised the CPR guidelines to emphasize that chest compressions actually are a more critical component than airway. So I don't know those of us that can remember, but back in the day, it was ABCs, right? Airway, breathing, circulation, or airway, breathing, compressions. Well, now they want people to look at it as CAB, so compressions, airway, breathing. All right, so today CPR standardized training is available in schools, workplaces, even online, making it accessible to anyone. And you know, it's really interesting to me, especially living up in a remote area. Back in the day, and where we see this change coming is you always had to have a physical instructor, right? You could do the online training, you could do all of that, but you always had to meet with an instructor that could do those skills with you, right? Not really so much anymore. So they have found that there is value in doing complete online training, even to those remote places. So we're trying to reach remote areas to where you can do everything online, right down to the skills. And it reminds me of our opening speaker, and she was talking about the future and technology and where it is going. And it's amazing to me that they have such great simulations now that you can do this all online and they can pick things up. So this I actually thought was kind of interesting. I graduated high school a while ago, all right? So as I'm doing this, I'm like, somebody had kind of mentioned, well, it's a high school graduation or requirement now. And I was like, no, it's not. Yeah, it is. So if you go on cprheart.org, this is a great website, and they actually will give you all of the states are in red, require CPR certification in order to graduate high school. All of the great areas, it just means that there's no law just yet. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But I thought that was really interesting, and of course Alaska is one of them, because we're always the last. But if I looked at some of, and you can actually go on this site and you can hover over the state, and it'll give you when it took place. So I kind of looked it up really quick, and Florida law actually started in July of 2021. I am from Indiana, so I'm a Hoosier, so of course I had to look that state up. And that started back in the graduating class of 2015-2016. And actually Georgia was kind of one of the older ones. They started in 2014-2015 graduating class. So they've been requiring it for 10 years. I'm like, who knew?